Welcome to another edition of the Women's Climbing Symposium online series. And tonight is the Power of Periods 2. So this is the second in the Power of Periods series. The last one, Natalie was just telling me, was we had a good chat, we got lots of questions from you, and this one should be answering those questions that you raised in the last talk with a bit more detail. So without further ado, Natalie or Nat, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Emma.
Right, oh, I forgot. Thank you to Adidas 510 for helping us to put these talks on. Cheers. Sorry, Nat, off you go.
You're so pro.
That's amazing. Right, I'm just going to share my screen. I have put some slides together, and hopefully, as Emma just said, it was great, the first session. Hopefully everyone enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully we'll have opportunity to have more conversations tonight, but at the same time there may be a bit more information to try and answer some of the questions that came up from the first session. So to jump straight into it, I suppose the power of periods really is what we've called these sessions, and there's kind of two reasons behind that. First of all, we've kind of got yes, periods can be powerful enough that they stop us. They have an impact. They cause loads of different symptoms. They might affect us in climbing or even day to day. But on the flip side, they can also be really, really amazing. In fact, they give us an indication that we're really healthy. They can actually provide so many positive symptoms, both physically and psychologically. And that's because of the two hormones, estrogen and progesterone. And there are strategies which can help us prevent periods from stopping us. So rather than the perceptions or the experience we maybe have of it just being me, I've got to get on with it, I've got to suck it up, it's no one else's problem. Hopefully some of tonight and the conversations and information might hopefully change some of that, so that we see periods in a positive way, and that they're kind of powerful in a way that is really beneficial to us rather than a negative. So one thing that I know a few people from the previous session asked is actually, we discussed symptoms, but where do symptoms relate to at different time of the cycle? So I'm going to go through that first, but just a quick recap, or potentially even new if you weren't here previously. This is what a menstrual cycle looks like. We've got two hormones involved in that: estrogen, which is the blue line, estrogen, which is the orange line, and progesterone, which is the blue line. Typically a menstrual cycle, so day one is day one of bleeding, so that's the first day of your period, to the time when you then experience your next period. That can range anything from 21 to 35 days. So we have this kind of, within a textbook, that would on average be a 28-day cycle, but actually it's really normal for that to be anything from 21 to 35 days, as long as that's kind of consistent each month. So day one of your cycle is recognized by day one of your period, and then you've got 4 phases throughout the menstrual cycle that we can split it into. So we've got the early follicular phase, phase 1, phase 2, the late follicular phase, which is pre-ovulation, phase 3, the midluteal phase, and then phase 4, which is that premenstrual phase. So hopefully that just gives like a bit of a recap of the hormones involved, maybe what a typical cycle would be like. So we're going to go a little bit more into the symptoms now. I'm literally going to go through these in the different phases. I'll talk through all of the symptoms, and then once I've kind of gone through all those, we'll then again ask any questions along the way, unmute yourself or pop it in chat, but there will be opportunity to talk once I've gone through all the symptoms as well. So within this early follicular phase, typically symptoms associated with your period. So, and it sounds really obvious, but obviously you've got blood loss during that time. It's quite normal to have stomach cramps, especially for the first maybe 1 to 2 days of your period. But also once you've kind of, after those first couple of days, it is quite quite normal and seen across quite a lot of females that actually all of a sudden you've got this clarity, this focus, and you can become really motivated. So sometimes symptoms are quite varied within that. So actually at the start of your period, you might not feel so great, but then actually towards the end of that time of your period and bleeding and the end of that phase, you actually have this kind of real clarity. I always describe it as always like someone's flipped a light switch, that all of a sudden you've gone from that like, what am I doing? What's going on? I feel awful, to being up and ready, really motivated, might try really hard in climbing. So that can be quite a variable phase for symptoms. And that normally is related to what day of your period you're on. Again, a lot of these are kind of generalizations. Everyone is completely different. Everyone will have completely different cycle and completely different symptoms. So don't worry if you're sat there thinking, oh, I don't fit into that. This is just kind of a generalization, but across the board what we normally see. So then if you move into that late follicular phase, so this is actually when we have this peak in estrogen. Estrogen can be really good. It can make you feel really good, can really increase your energy and your motivation. It might be a time when you feel like you have really good recovery, so you feel like you can do loads of training or loads of climbing back to back and just be able to like keep going and feeling great. It's also a time when we have decreased illness, so we're maybe less susceptible to illness. I have put on there that you might be increased risk of injury, and that's just the effect of estrogen. And when I say injury, that's maybe more related to kind of tendon ligament injuries. So estrogen, when that increases, interacts with receptors within your ligaments that can make your joints maybe more lax and slightly less stable. So in some instances, you've got an increased risk of injury, but that is more common in sports that maybe where you've got changes of direction quickly at speed. So things like maybe if you're bouldering inside and that more kind of dynamic, kind of more comped style might be where you potentially are more at risk, more so than other aspects of climbing. It's a really good time for constructive feedback or to have kind of really difficult conversations, or if you want to learn something new, normally you can really kind of engage and try something and push yourself, maybe a new challenge. That's also a really good time to start that. And then also, you know, in that phase, feeling really strong, able to do high intense sessions. And that's because actually within this phase, you have a predominance of using glucose as your energy fuel. So you've got that immediate energy there so that you're able to perform that really high intense kind of maximal type exercise. As we go into the mid-luteal phase, though, although we've got this decrease initially in estrogen, that then starts to increase, but you can also see you've got this larger rise in progesterone. And that can have different, again, cause different symptoms. At this stage, you might have, instead of that high intense sessions, you might feel that you've got way more, your endurance feels much better. That's because we start shifting from that glucose glycogen metabolism more to a fat metabolism. So you don't have that such immediate store of energy. So when we're thinking about that, if you are doing a high intense session, that is possible, but you might just need to make sure you fuel and give your body some immediate fuel to be able to complete those sessions, because otherwise it's maybe relying on more of that fat metabolism, which is much more suited for endurance, so low intensity but longer exercise. This is a phase of where we might also experience changes in bowel habits, and so there's constipation and bloating are quite normal within this phase. It's also associated with poorer coordination and less risk taking. So actually, how does that make you feel when you're climbing? This may be a time when you maybe feel more scared if you're leading, or just in general taking less risk on different moves. That's kind of a time where you might become more aware of that. On the flip side, you are also progesterone is an appetite stimulant, so you might also feel way more hungry in the mid-luteal phase. It's normal to have an increase in body temperature, because that happens post ovulation. But what that can mean is actually sometimes exercise can feel harder because you're hotter. It can give you a higher perception of effort. So it might just feel like you're having to work way, way harder than what you would maybe the week or 2 weeks before. But then also within this phase, really varied, you can also be super productive. I know this is something that I definitely get, that actually all of a sudden feel like climbing and training I've not got much motivation for, but I can be really productive and get loads of stuff done, and have like a lot of patience to sit down and maybe do a lot of work or a lot of reading, so that's also really normal in that mid-luteal phase. And then finally, this late luteal phase, so this premenstrual phase, this is what most people are more familiar with when it comes to menstrual cycle symptoms. It's where we kind of have those potentially stomach cramps, feel a bit groggy under the weather, kind of like feel like getting a cold, maybe more stressed. So that's when recovery is super important within that late luteal phase. So really being on top of what you're eating, sleeping, your hydration, all of those things. It's also normal to have headaches, fatigue, not have much motivation to train. Breast swelling and pain is really normal, and a decreased pain tolerance as well. So actually that's the phase where we kind of are maybe more familiar with that premenstrual PMS type symptoms that can be perceived as more negative. But hopefully we'll go on in a bit to discuss how we can maybe reduce some of those symptoms, so it's not seen as such a time of the month where we're like, oh, this is rubbish, I feel awful, my periods come in, I just don't want to do anything. So hopefully we'll go through a few of that in a bit. But before we do, I think it'd just be a really nice opportunity to actually, yeah, should we maybe go into breakout groups just so it's a smaller number, and just have a chat? What do you experience? I could, because I'm very aware of my symptoms, I've tracked them, I can tell you what symptoms I experience in each of those 4 phases. So should we go into some breakout rooms and just have a chat, to talk, share, what have you noticed, what do you experience, and how do you manage that with climbing? Please feel free to share. Thanks, Emma. So lovely to chat with people in my room. Hopefully just provided an opportunity for you guys to have a chat. I know that we definitely did, within the room I was in. We were talking around tracking and getting used to knowing what your own symptoms might be like, what it's like being on hormonal contraceptive and then coming off that and working out what's different. Yeah, I can just see Poppy's saying tracking definitely helps with understanding the emotions like PMS. I definitely find that helps. We were just talking actually around, it sometimes means that you don't give yourself such a hard time. You're just like, why do I feel like this? Or why can I not do something that I could before? Whereas actually relating to your menstrual cycle, having that awareness means that actually you can, be aware of that and just know how to manage it. Definitely saying empowering, yes, that's a great word. I think it definitely makes a difference because you can manage it yourself then, rather than letting it almost manage and take over you. I'll just start sharing my screen again, but please keep sharing any of your comments and thoughts. If I can find the chat again, there we go. One thing we did touch on actually in our group as well that I will share, was around how important it is to have a regular cycle. And actually, if that cycle's longer than 35 days, again, by tracking it allows you to note that, so you know how long they are, and also then give you kind of a bit of an indication if something maybe isn't quite right, whether that's you're stressed, you're tired, you've had a slight hormone imbalance, you're training too much but not eating enough. So all of those things may be a result of your menstrual cycle stopping. So, oh, sorry, skipping ahead of myself. So talking through symptoms, but hopefully we'll actually discuss a little bit now around the causes of symptoms. There is no one specific cause of premenstrual symptoms or symptoms throughout the whole cycle. There's a whole list of different ones. So to start off with, I put their neuroendocrine. So that means the interaction between your hormones and your brain. And actually, when you've got increases and decreases in estrogen and progesterone, like we've seen throughout a cycle, they're interacting with your brain and can make you feel happy, but they can also change your mood. So they're definitely one reason why we do have those symptoms. In more detail of that, I suppose you've got a variation in estrogen. Some estrogen is great, so that can be what makes you feel really good, can make you feel really motivated. But actually, too much, if that keeps going up, and that can normally be a result of not having enough progesterone, so they don't balance each other. That can then actually start causing fluid retention, so that bloating can make you more irritable, can give you headaches. That's why it's actually quite frequent when you're taking hormonal contraceptives, especially the combined pill, when you have that 7-day break. Headaches can actually be really common during that break, because all of a sudden your natural estrogen levels might be able to start rising that your body's not used to, and they can cause you to have headaches. The flip side of that is also the rapid decline in both hormone levels. So within that premenstrual phase, if I just flip back, in this late luteal phase, premenstrual, you can see there's a rapid decline in both of those hormone levels. And actually that's what can cause symptoms, because all of a sudden your body's been dealing with all those hormones and they all decrease. And it's almost like your body's like, what is going on? And again, can just cause those changes in interaction with your brain, and can change your mood, emotions. They're very much associated with those sorts of premenstrual symptoms. Inflammatory response is also a reason that causes less progesterone and more estrogen. So there's various reasons you might have an inflammatory response. Vitamin and mineral deficiencies, they can also cause symptoms to be more severe. Your diet can also make symptoms to be more severe. Stress, your weight, but that's, if when I've put weight there, that's actually if you're kind of severely overweight, obese, that can cause premenstrual symptoms to be much worse. And you've also got prostaglandins. I'm aware this is very kind of science-based, so hopefully not too overwhelming. But prostaglandins are released when your uterine lining starts to degenerate. So if you're not pregnant, when that starts to kind of degenerate, ready for your period, you actually get an increase in prostaglandins that cause inflammation, and that inflammation then can cause cramps, headaches, make you feel nauseous, and is also one of the main things that causes diarrhea around that kind of like just as you're starting your period. So there's so many different factors and causes of symptoms, which is why it can be really hard to work out what's going on. But hopefully by tracking your symptom, you can work out which ones you experience, and therefore may be able to start working out what is the cause of that. I'm going to go through some specific examples, but please shout out with any questions as I go through this. So first of all, general advice for managing symptoms. So again, there are so many different symptoms, it's really hard for me to go into detail of all of them. But some general advice is get to know your symptoms, and that's in order to reduce them rather than to anticipate them. So quite a few people say to me, oh, but if I track them, I'm like, I'm going to feel like this next week. And that can almost be a negative thing, because they're anticipating feeling rubbish or not being able to train as well, or feeling more emotional. But actually think of it as tracking them, so then you can manage them, so you don't have to experience those symptoms. Always, I know this sounds so silly, but be kind to yourself. Like, look after yourself. If you're not feeling great, if you feel like you need a rest day, have a rest day. Really look after yourself. And with that as well, put lower down there of staying active. So that doesn't have to be going to do a maximal session, but going for a walk, which will all help reduce stress and fatigue. Some other ideas I've put there around sleep. So, trying to get a good 8 hours sleep a night. Meditation might help some people, it's not for everyone. I find actually yoga helps me more so than meditation does. That also helps manage my stress levels, which again, all has a knock-on effect with my menstrual cycle. Other things might be for others, reading a book might help them have more of that kind of relaxing, calming effect. I've already mentioned recovery, really thinking about your sleep and food are the two most basic forms of recovery, alongside just resting and having some time to let your body recover. And I suppose a lot of that is through tracking, you can become more self-aware and then be able to actually start listening to your body so that actually what days actually is my body able to push on, or what days do I need to maybe, think about some of these other factors. So I'm happy to share some examples from myself, but please, everyone else, share yours as well of how you manage symptoms. I know that the week before my period, I feel way less motivated and feel really tired, which does affect me climbing. So actually within that, I make sure if I am really struggling, rather than doing more kind of high intense sessions or a lot of training, I'll do kind of more of a stretch, yoga, mobility. I'll also really prioritize sleep, so making sure I do get to bed at a good time. And then the last thing is eating. So actually that's a time, and I'll go on to some sugar craving tips in a minute, but a time where maybe I want to eat food that's maybe not so helpful. So really just kind of stay on top of eating fruit and veg to, really help with that inflammation and try and give me that energy that I need. The other thing I've put on there is menstrual products. One symptom can actually be heavy bleeding, or just bleeding in general. And again, that is something that can really make a difference of knowing what products to use that work for you, that actually makes your period much more manageable. So I've put on there menstrual cups and period pants, but that's just because that's sharing my personal experience. That actually I found that's so much better. It means that it doesn't distract me as much. I'm not thinking, oh my gosh, am I bleeding? Am I showing through? Especially when, I don't know about anyone else, especially if I'm, lead climbing or on a rope and I've got a harness and I'm higher up and I think, oh gosh, if people are below me, can they see that I've leaked through? Have I got blood showing through? And you're kind of moving quite different directions. So I've definitely found those two have meant that actually the symptom of my period is much more manageable and much less stressful. So I'm just gonna, has anyone got anything of generally or anything I've said there that you can relate to or have found really helpful for yourself? I can get, oh, here we go. Couldn't get the chat box to come up. I've definitely found with menstrual cups and period pants that they really help with leaking. Just feel, so if I'm really worried, I can put a menstrual cup in and then just also wear a pair of the period pants as well. So then I've almost like doubled up, which is also way more comfortable than, I find both of them way more comfortable than like tampons or the hassle of having to change them, or kind of like using pads as well. Just find them that they're way more comfortable when I'm climbing and also more kind of environmentally friendly. So for me, it was almost like a win-win situation choosing those two. Katie, I hope you don't mind me sharing. I think everyone can see that just said you've realised why you're craving so many takeaways last week. It's so common. It's not always just sugar. It's just kind of maybe foods that aren't so what we'd not that we'd maybe describe more as processed or high in fats, that kind of you do crave, you are more hungry. but I'll go on to give some tips for that in a bit, that can kind of help manage those.
It's really interesting because I know I've always been hungry on my period, but it wasn't until your webinar like 2 or 3 weeks ago that I realised, oh, that's why I get hungrier like a few weeks beforehand as well. So,
yeah, definitely. It's so normal a couple of weeks before to feel more hungry. And you'll see in a minute, I've literally said if you feel hungry, like eat some more. But then it's trying to have some really good choices of how you can actually satisfy, and proteins are always a really good one for that. So you feel satisfied, so then hopefully that takes away some of those cravings to have takeaways when you're just like, I want to eat everything. I know I definitely had that the other week. I was just like everything. I was like, I couldn't go food shopping because I was just like, I literally want everything. So I had to make sure I had a snack first to make myself feel more satisfied. So I didn't just buy everything and anything. Any other comments that anyone would like to share or awareness? If not, I'll jump through, but again, just put them in the chat, talk as we go through this. So I'm going to go through some symptoms now. As I said, we'd be here all night if I tried to go through every symptom of the menstrual cycle, but hopefully this will give you a start, and we can kind of refer you to different places and information if you want to find out more. Cramps normally start 1 to 2 days before their period. Either like 1 to 2 days before a period starts and or the first 1 to 2 days of your period. That does vary between different people. Already mentioned that actually prostaglandins, which cause inflammation, are kind of one of the predominant causes of cramps, or histamine intolerance. Different things to do. If you really need to, you can use over-the-counter painkillers. Obviously, the caveat if you've got no underlying medical conditions or things like that. But there are ways to try and reduce those cramps without having to take any sort of medication. Staying active, light exercise and yoga can reduce the pain. But managing estrogen levels, so thinking about food, so reducing alcohol intake, healthy gut bacteria is really important, because that allows your body to actually process estrogen and remove the estrogen from your body rather than it being reabsorbed, and reducing those processed foods, especially, and that can help manage an excessive buildup of the uterus lining, which can increase cramps even more. Then the other thing is reducing stress. So stress can cause inflammation. So it can be really normal if you've had a really stressful time that actually your stomach cramps may be worse. So it is so important to try and check in with how you're feeling stress level wise and trying to manage that, because that will actually, you'll see that's quite a consistent one across a lot of the symptoms, can actually make symptoms much worse. So really trying to manage that. And a hot water bottle, I always find, is really helpful, but obviously having a hot water bottle whilst climbing isn't always practical. But things like the stick-on heat patches, they can be absolutely amazing. I find if I if I'm going out climbing for a day and I don't want cramps to stop me, actually just putting sticking a heat pad on my back can really reduce those cramps, and then it doesn't stop me. I can still climb as normal, and it's kind of a win-win situation. But again, it does depend on what works for you. So for some people, heat will feel way better than trying to do some light exercise. But try and just, with that, if you don't fancy doing yoga, even just going for a gentle walk or just trying to move, rather than just sitting still, will actually make it feel much better. I'm just picking up on Teresa's comment there around having magnesium. That is another option that you can try. Definitely, again, that's like a medical recommendation, so seek medical advice on that as to how much magnesium to take, and potentially get that tested before you start taking it, just to make sure your kind of levels aren't too high. But that can definitely help reduce stomach cramps as well if they're really severe. Okay, going on to kind of more the bloating. I've kind of linked these all together, bloating, bowel habits and inflammation, because there's quite a few options to manage those that are really similar. I mentioned last time actually with bloating, sometimes the last thing you want to do is drink any water because you feel really bloated and like full already, but actually by staying hydrated can really help to reduce your bloating. Again, it can just kind of help clear out that excessive fluid retention, so it can really help reduce that feeling. Another thing for bloating can be eating little and often, so avoiding kind of like really big meals. So just trying to have more food throughout the day can help if you do feel really bloated, but that still means then that you're getting the right foods on board, and you're staying well fueled to be able to manage the exercise that you're doing with climbing. Another one, it sounds silly, but chew your food really well. That can really help reduce feelings of being bloated, just by making sure you actually chew your food, rather than literally just quickly eating. Limit alcohol, caffeine and fizzy drinks. Definitely the two predominant ones there are the alcohol and the fizzy drinks, but bloating in some people and bowel habits can be kind of worse with caffeine, but again, that it is individual, but it might just be something worth thinking about. A really key one is, and this is linked with the inflammation as well and cramps across all of them, is trying to cut down on that high fat processed food, so like crisps, chips, cake, those sorts of kind of foods, and instead really try and focus on some fresh ingredients. If you do get really bloated at that time, maybe limit the fruit intake, but really kind of maintain your vegetable intake. But again, if you don't get any symptoms around bloating, then obviously stick to having fruit intake as much as you want, but you don't need to reduce it less than 3 portions a day. Just seeing that there's a comment in the chat. I need to learn to chew food, from Rebecca. Definitely, it makes a really big difference how making sure you chew that properly. It kind of helps feel full, so you can feel more satisfied, rather than just feeling hungry and keep eating, but it can also really help kind of break it down and not feel as bloated. As I mentioned, if you are feeling hungry, really think about your protein intake, because that really kind of helps manage that increase in appetite. So I know previously, I think it was Rebecca Dent that gave a talk on here, and gave some really good ideas for snacks that were protein based, but obviously things like cottage cheese, yogurt, eggs, they're all high in protein, and that can be really good as a snack. Diet can decrease prostaglandins, so that inflammation that's being caused, that increases cramps and headaches and all of those other symptoms. Your diet can help reduce those, so cutting down on the high processed foods is one thing which would help decrease those prostaglandins. I'm really focusing on, again, as I said, that food intake that can be really helpful for inflammation. Fruit and veg have anti-inflammatory properties. They can reduce some of those symptoms, and also fiber content is really important, which again, those processed foods don't have that fiber content that basically help to metabolize the estrogen within your body and expel it, rather than it being reabsorbed into your body. So loads of hopefully of kind of more diet-based options for you to think about then. What about, I've just seen in the chat, what about increasing fat as well as protein? So healthy fats, yeah, definitely there's a big difference between healthy fats versus processed foods. So when we're talking about healthy fats, we've got nuts, avocados, things like that, that again can really help and help manage that kind of increase in appetite, and also really important for a lot of different different purposes, really. Has anyone got any more questions, comments around bloating, food, or kind of those sorts of things? Not at the moment. Okay. Linked with food, the flip side of that is also sugar cravings. We know it's really normal to want chocolate and kind of more sweet, sugary foods. That also is because progesterone, when that's elevated, is an appetite stimulant. So it makes you feel hungrier. I've put there really simple: if you're hungrier, eat more. Okay. Again, this is part of being kind to yourself, looking after yourself and listening to your body. If you are hungry, eat more, but choose those satisfying snacks that are protein based. And if you can, though, choose those protein based snacks so that you do feel full and more satisfied, to then avoid having those sugar cravings, because the more you can avoid sugar, again, that does affect your estrogen levels and it can increase inflammation, which can make your symptoms much worse. Again, it is all in moderation, but hopefully by having some more of those, eating more so that you're not hungry, and having kind of good choice of snacks, can really help to reduce that sugar craving, and avoid you wanting cake and things like that, that again are higher in processed fats that can have a negative effect on your symptoms. And then the other one I've put there is check your sleep. So actually, a lot of the time for wanting sugar cravings, that can also be because we're tired and we're fatigued. And we know that there's symptoms of premenstrual symptoms that we might feel, so lower energy, but actually trying to balance that out with maybe having a bit more sleep. I know that I definitely find trying to make sure I focus on my sleep that week before my period can really help manage some of those cravings, just because it helps me feel not as tired. It gives me a bit more energy to counteract the feelings of that premenstrual phase. Okay, before I jump into, I'll go through contraceptives and then we'll kind of have a catch up before I finish up going through just some information around kind of more that perimenopause and menopause phase of the life cycle. But I wanted to hopefully provide some, even though this is probably going to seem so vague, information on contraceptives. We could probably do a whole another like day of conversation just linked around contraceptives, because there are so many different options that have a different effect on everyone individually. But hopefully this gives some information that, dependent on the type of contraceptive you're on, you can still experience premenstrual symptoms, and that's linked to the drop in hormones or an imbalance in hormones. So for example, the most common one of that being the combined pill, you can definitely get kind of more premenstrual symptoms with that. Whereas with some of the other maybe more progestin based contraceptives, symptoms may be more irregular. So for both of those, you can definitely track your cycle. You obviously don't have a cycle as such, but you can try and track your symptoms to see if there are any symptoms that are more common. So then you can manage those based on maybe some of the suggestions previously. Or it might, flip side of that, help you identify that actually it's not linked to your menstrual cycle or contraceptives, but it's actually what I call life symptoms that are causing changes in mood or feelings of less motivation or tiredness. Tracking those might really help you differentiate what's causing that. I have put there that, you know, if you are experiencing severe symptoms like depression, as just one example, when you're taking contraceptives, that might mean that it's not the best contraceptive option for you. That doesn't mean to say that you have to come off it. You know, if you prefer to be on a contraceptive for various reasons, there's definitely the option to stay on it, but it might be worth looking into a different type. I know I at one point was on the combined pill, and I went to the doctors and they said it was exactly the same pill, just a different branding. And I was all over the place. I felt really emotional. I kept crying. I just had no motivation to do anything. And actually, it was just that there was slightly different ingredients in that contraceptive pill that was making me my body was just responding differently to that, and it just didn't suit me. And as soon as I changed back, again, that all settled down. So it's just something to be aware of. For some people, they, for example, get an IUD or a hormonal progestin only pill, don't ever have any symptoms, don't ever have any bleeds, whereas for others it makes them just bleed for ages. And so again, work it out, try it out, but don't be afraid to go back and say this one's not working for me, I want to try something different. The reason that they can help with some symptoms, definitely is not the only option. Hopefully I've shown you that there are natural ways to manage symptoms, but if you did find that contraceptives help reduce symptoms, that's mainly because they lower the production of prostaglandins, because you don't have that uterus lining buildup, which reduces menstrual cramps. And they also reduce androgens in your body, which might help you with like your skin. So that's another reason we know that potentially contraceptives are used for purposes other than contraception. Okay, I'm just gonna see if there are any comments in the chat. Please feel free to share anything. Is anyone got any experience of a natural cycle versus contraceptives? I know that there were definitely plus sides of contraception when I was on that. It was really regular. I didn't have the ups and downs that I do having a natural cycle, but on the flip side of that, I quite like having the real highs. And obviously I'm more and more aware of my own symptoms and how to manage them, so I'm actually getting less and less symptoms now. Not all the time. I definitely still have months when other external factors like work, mainly work, affect me. So all of a sudden, like, I just want chocolate, or I've not had enough sleep, or my stress is increased, that causes them to be worse again. But it's just about checking in and then being aware of that. Just looking in the comments. Yeah, definitely natural symptoms can be experienced on the combined pill. It's just because of when you have that 7-day break, all of a sudden, I'll show you a graph next actually, it just allows sometimes your natural estrogen levels to start increasing, which can cause some of those symptoms that your body's not used to having that estrogen level. So all of a sudden it's like responds to that, and that's the response it has. Definitely knowing when to change brand of pill. I was on progesterone only pill and didn't have a period in over 6 months, then was put on a different brand and ended up having periods lasting 2+ weeks. Yeah, so it's really, really varied, and definitely I would recommend that if you're not having a good time, symptoms seem more severe, extended bleeding periods, anything like that, definitely go back in and kind of say, I just don't think this contraceptive is working for me. What are the other contraceptive options? As I said, it doesn't mean to necessarily say you don't have to take them, but I would also say if you're taking them for managing of symptoms, definitely think about some of what we've discussed tonight as to whether there's alternatives that can help you manage that naturally if you wanted to. So this was the graph I was actually talking about, and this goes through, I quite like this, how you can see the difference, that this top graph A is actually a natural hormonal cycle. So hopefully the estrogen progesterone levels are familiar, and we've just added in the two hormones LH and FSH, which are the ones that interact with your brain. So you can see you have real kind of increases, decreases in that. The flip side of that is if you look at graph B, that's actually what your hormone levels look like from taking the combined pill. So every day you take a pill, you get a very small increase that then drops down. But those levels pretty much stay below what your lowest would be if you were not taking any contraceptives. But actually it is quite normal if that at that 21 days for your estrogen to rise a little bit, again, as I've just said, causes symptoms. But then if you look to that kind of perimenopause to menopause phase, that's where you can see that all of a sudden hormones just go all over the place. Estrogen fluctuates so much, which is why you can experience so many different symptoms around the menopause, which hopefully this clarifies a bit more. So premenopause is obviously the first sign of the menstrual cycle to the first signs of menopause. And then the perimenopause is when you've got estrogen levels starting to decline, but they also fluctuate and can cause really irregular cycles. And that lasts up to the point where your menstrual cycle stops. And during that perimenopause phase, that's actually when you experience a lot of the kind of more negative symptoms that we'd associate. So that could be longer or heavier periods, that might be shorter cycles, sore, swollen breasts, waking up during sleeping is really common. Cramps might be more severe. Night sweats, migraines, premenstrual mood swings. It just gets better and better as you go through the perimenopause list. But that kind of all ends then when you get to that kind of menopause, when your menstrual cycle stops completely. But as you can see, that's kind of, you know, we talk about the menopause quite a lot, but actually it's the perimenopause phase where you can get a lot of those variation in symptoms. And again, a lot of that is linked to your estrogen levels. Again, this is another topic that I feel like we could talk about all day. So hopefully I've tried to squeeze in some bits of information to answer some questions that came up from the previous session or within this hour. So on that note, if anyone's got any questions, I'm just going to look in the chat because I can see a few comments in there. If you're unsure if anxiety is from life symptoms or the pill, just maybe track when you're having feeling more anxious and track if that's you know, make a note somewhere, if that's on your phone, in a diary, if you've had any kind of more stressful situations or more stressed at work or life, so you can start kind of identifying that. If it's something you felt for a prolonged periods of time, then potentially that could be linked to the contraceptive pill, and it might just be worth trying a different one or a different form of contraception. Great to see that you thought the graphs were fascinating. I didn't know whether to include them just in case I was getting a bit too sciencey, but I really like how it just clearly shows you the difference between a natural cycle, what hormonal contraceptives do, and then also what happens when you start getting into that perimenopause phase. The Mirena coil, that's actually, you don't get those increases that you see every day that you do with a combined pill. That's very much, again, an even flatter line of a very steady release of hormones. I'm just going through some of your questions. I hope this helps. Oh, great to see that loads of you liked the graphs. I'm glad I included them there. Does low blood pressure impact cramps and periods? In all honesty, I do not know that, but I'm happy to try and find out if you want to drop me a message, and I can follow up on that and try and help out if that would be of use. Definitely what I would say, I know it's kind of, if there are any, whilst there's any other questions coming in, if you did want to look into more or find out more about managing different symptoms, there's actually an amazing book that I've read by Lara Bryden, which is called The Period Repair Manual. I actually found that quite easy, quite good to read. It is kind of science-based, but it's broken down, explained really well, and it goes through all different symptoms, but it also goes into other things like PCOS and endometriosis, and kind of all things that, as I said, there was just too much to cover, that it would be overwhelming within this hour to talk through. And I'm happy to share that information, so then you've all got that. Any more questions from anyone? I hope that's been useful. As I said, I'm aware that this session was a lot more information rather than conversation, but I hope it answered some of the questions that came out from the first session, for you to be able to go away and to be able to use, and hopefully be helpful. I just have to run the first period day. It's all kind of linked with that light exercise, movement, and how that helps your body basically manage the inflammation and how to manage those prostaglandins. It's kind of all linked. That's why we say, actually, for some people, light exercise, but maybe running is the one thing that helps you. So yeah, it's all kind of linked to that, and that's definitely common. Do you have any tips on effectively tracking period symptoms? Yeah, what I try and do is start off, if you can, if you almost have those times when you're like, oh, why do I feel really emotional? Just make a note of that. And actually you can start then seeing when those symptoms occur, and try and do that for at least 3 months, so you can see which symptoms are a result of your menstrual cycle that occur in commonly and consistently, but maybe which ones are more influenced by life in general, and then hopefully that starts becoming more and more aware of what symptoms are common for you. And the more you start doing that, you kind of, I don't know about everyone else, but that awareness, that self-awareness, you become more in tune with yourself, so you start recognizing which symptoms. But there's also, if you do use apps, there are kind of prompts on there, so there are different symptoms that you can kind of highlight in different, so for example, like how is your mood, and you might be able to rate that. So there's different symptoms that actually prompt you to think about, and you can rate whether they're like good or bad or severe and things like that, to kind of help you work it all out. One more question I've seen, do we have testosterone that cycles through us in a cycle, and what are the effects? Testosterone generally follows a similar kind of the graph shape of estrogen. So when you've got peaks in estrogen, generally not long after that you have peaks in testosterone, which is why especially pre-ovulation, when you've got that highest peak in estrogen, you can feel really strong, really motivated, not scared, up for a challenge. That can also be not just the effect of estrogen, but also the effect of testosterone. But you don't get those cycles so much in testosterone if you're taking a hormonal contraception, because you're not having the ups and downs that you do in a natural cycle. Have we got any more questions? That's everything. I think I've answered all your questions that were in the chat box.
That's a massive win. I think the tip about sort of starting to sort of journal things is really helpful. I had a period while I was at university where I was an athlete for a whole year, and I was having to make a weight limit. I was dieting, and all of these things were kind of coming together, and I was obsessively chronicling everything, and I kind of had a sense of myself. And then the moment I stopped that, I was like, right, I'm never doing that again. But actually, just in recent years, I started coming back to, my sleep and my food and my menstrual cycle, and all of these things kind of come together, and that's why my climbing's crap. So really just another vote for that. It can make a real difference just to start to try to understand yourself on that.
Yeah, and I think once you do it for a little bit of time, you almost just then get in tune with yourself. So it's not something you have to do forever. Doing it for a few months, you kind of just get in tune with yourself and become a bit more aware. So then you don't necessarily have to keep tracking it and writing it down and such, but you've got that awareness then of knowing when to check in and what have you forgot, what have you let slip, what do you need to kind of focus on again for a little bit.
Amazing, thanks Nat. I just noticed, actually I meant to notice on this on UKC a lot more, but there's a sort of series of articles at the moment on UKC by Lattice about training the menstrual cycle, so probably some extra info there for people who are going away and doing their research. Thanks so much Nat once again for being so candid and interactive and giving such a great insight into that. And we hope you have a lovely week climbing. Not
Thank
that we're
you.
jealous in the sun.
I won't say too much so that you're not all jealous.
We'll be watching your Instagram. Yeah, thanks so much everybody. Bye bye.